My name is John Methven. I joined the Army when I was 18. I later got selected for Portsea, which is the officer training school here in Victoria. I was sent to SIGS. I was trained as a radio and telegraph mechanic, which they told me I had an aptitude for, but which I had no desire to do, typical Army. And then I managed to get a secondment to infantry for a year as a second lieutenant, and I got 2 more extensions of that because the battalion I went to, 7 Battalion, were starting to prepare to go to Vietnam. I went to Vietnam with the battalion, initially as a platoon commander and then as the RSO, which was the Regimental Signals Officer, responsible for all communications throughout the battalion and air to ground and so forth.
John, can you tell us about going to Vietnam? How did it work? Was a unit sent or did you have to volunteer?
No, there was no volunteering. It was a regular. If you were in the battalion, you were to go to Vietnam. I believed in what we were doing in Vietnam, and now I went over with the advanced party of the battalion. We did a lot of training before. We were a very well trained battalion. It's interesting, we were what known as the Pig Battalion, which is a bit of an unusual sort of mascot for a battalion to have. But that came about by the diggers themselves through a little incident. And after jungle training at Canungra, the battalion was due to go to Vietnam in April of 1967. So I went over a month ahead with the advanced party and served the 12 months with the battalion there, and then stayed with the rear party. I drew the unlucky straw of doing an extra month before we came home.
Can you tell us about the jungle training? What sort of things did you need to do?
They said that every person that goes to Vietnam has to pass through Canungra, which is the jungle training centre in Queensland. It was chosen because of the terrain was very similar, not the bamboo sort of stuff, but the thickness of the terrain and the works was. I actually didn't do the actual training with the battalion there because my platoon was selected to do the demonstration things for a while. So we spent the whole time just doing the demonstrations for the diggers as they came through, company by company and so forth. But basically it was learning all about jungle warfare, the need for the silence, the need to be separated, not staying in groups, how to move through the jungle, how to pass messages without talking and so forth, all the required things, how to operate with rations in the field.
And how long was that training?
The jungle training was usually about 28 days, somewhere around there, and the whole battalion had to go through. They went through company by company. The 6 companies went through over that period of time.
Where were you and what was it like when you first arrived in Vietnam?
I think the thing that hits just about anyone is I flew out with the advanced party, so the rest of the guys went with the went by ship, which takes them about 2 to 3 weeks to get there. I flew in, and the moment you land, you walk out of the plane, and because the heat hits you, it's not something that you're accustomed to. And from there, by just the Caribou aircraft to the Australian Army base at Nui Dat, which was where we were taking over from 5 Battalion, and I moved into their lines and spent the next period of time until the battalion arrived, going out on operation with 5 Battalion and being with my counterpart, so that I was fully aware of what was going on by the time the battalion got there.
Was there any sense of fear, or were you worried at all when you arrived there?
It's funny, I don't think that I think we were trained so well that it was just an automatic sort of thing to do. You're ready for it. I think fear sort of comes during a contact, perhaps, but basically, no. We were so accustomed to what we were trained for that you just went about it and did it. We'd moved into the battalion base where we took over from 5 Battalion. We lived in 4-man tents with sandbagging around for mortar attacks and so forth, and mortar pits out the back. My role, which was captain's position as the RSO, I was lucky enough to have tent, a four-man tent by myself, of which I had a lot of equipment that in there as well.
Can you explain the battalion structure?
An infantry battalion in Australia, we consist of 4 infantry companies. These companies are specialised as infantrymen training. As I said, the training was very good. Our battalion was very well trained, and the guys were very close by the time we went over. And we had a almost 50-50 mix of national servicemen and regular soldiers. By the time our national servicemen got there, they were men who were unlucky enough to be balloted into the army. By the time they got there, they were just as trained. I had an enlarged platoon, bigger than the normal platoon, because my men were farmed right throughout. I couldn't tell you who was national service and who were regular at the end, because, everyone was there. So you had 4 infantry battalions. Each battalion was around about the 200 odd men. You had a support company, which consisted of the mortar platoon, the anti-tank platoon, the signals platoon, and these were the specialist platoons. And they were, in most cases, farmed out to various sections of the battalion as required. And then you had a battalion headquarters, and you had just a admin company which was responsible for all the administration that was required for 1,000 men in the field.
And what was the company rotation? Were there 2 companies in the field and 1 resting?
Quite often it would be one company would be out at a time, but we had a number of operations where the whole battalion was on the move. During the Tet Offensive, which was in 1968, in February of 68, the whole battalion was taken out of the Phuoc Tuy province, which was the province that the Australians were responsible for, and we went north of Ton Son Nhut Airport, the American Air Force Base in Saigon. Our role there was to cut the enemy coming back from their assaults on Saigon and Ton Son Nhut and so forth. And during that time, the whole battalion, including battalion headquarters, at one stage were all under attack. So you had the whole setup of the infantry battalion, support company, and battalion headquarters all under attack at one time.
And was the whole battalion out in the bush at that stage?
All but elements of support company, yeah, they were. I had another role as well. If we were going to move into an area where there were likely to be friendly Vietnamese forces or something, I used to get detached to that particular force to ensure that our battalion and that force didn't clash together. So I spent some time with the ARVN, which were the regular South Vietnamese, and some time with the Montagnards at S2E1, who were Montagnards were the hill people, the Vietnamese hill people, wonderful people, very loyal. I couldn't say the same about the ARVN forces. I didn't trust them at all. I had a couple of nasty instances, so I didn't. So that was another role that I had as well.
What sort of instances? Can you talk about it?
Oh, there was one where we were north of Dat Do, where I was based with the ARVN forces there, and we were about 20k out, and the ARVN were in a circle around the hills while we were conducting some work there. I had an American artillery captain attached with me and a Negro sergeant. We got hit at that particular time, and the first thing I could see was the ARVN shooting through. They just up and off. We got back to the base that they were all right, but with a few holes in things. And I always remember we were helping construct what was going to be a resettlement village. And whilst we weren't supposed to, we were helping in the building of this thing. And the American captain was up on the top of the framework of the village, of this hut that we were building. And when the first rounds hit, he jumped to get down pretty quick smart, but he caught his chin under the bar below him. So when he hit the ground, he was out to it. And by the time we got him into the vehicle, as he started to come to, first thing he wanted me to do was bloody agree to sign a document to say he'd got a Purple Heart. And because in Australia we don't have that sort of thing, I just told him to get nicked, wait till he gets hit before I'll do that.
And working with Americans, did you work with a lot of Americans?
I did, and I was lucky enough to spend a week down at Thompson Airfield, 90 Attack Fighter Squadron. They had a squadron of F-100, the old Super Sabre jets. I was there to liaise with them and the works, and it was fantastic. I managed to wangle a couple of flights over Vietnam in the F-100. Each squadron had one two-seater, and that was an incredible experience.
And coming back to your battalion when you were under attack, what sort of attack was it? Was it artillery or mortars?
Oh no, ground, mainly ground. Obviously, they would have mortars and the works, but primarily it was ground. Our guys, most of the contacts would occur when companies were going out and platoons were moving through, looking. They'd pick up a trail. They might sit on it and ambush it for a night or two. You might come across an enemy force moving, down the track or whatever, and contacts would start that way and it would develop from there.
When the battalion went out, how long were you in the bush for?
You'd be out for 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks, depending on what the task was, what the role was, and moving. We had a very large percentage of the time in the bush. You'd come back to base camp for maybe 2 days, 3 days or something, and you'd come back and your support admin company would have to man the perimeter while the guys had a bit of a break the first day back. And because the first thing you'd do is go for the boozer. It was pretty good. We had set up, the guys were bloody very clever the way I did it. They could turn anything into something good. And they'd set up a little picture theatre in amongst the rubber plantation. And you could go down and sit on these little wooden seats that they'd built, and you'd watch the latest movie. So you had a choice. You could either stay in a boozer and get drunk or go and watch a movie. So I'd have a couple of beers and then I'd get a couple of glasses of chock-a-block full of Crenamon or something like that and take it down to watch the film. I don't think I ever bloody saw the whole end of the film, but someone finished sculled these things. And you wake up next morning thinking, God, what happened? Yeah, that's the way you operated. And this is how you had nothing but admiration for our guys.
And resupply of food when you were out in the bush?
Yes, we would get chopper resupply if we required it. We had to carry everything that we required for 3 to 4 days, and then we would get a resupply. Our ration packs might carry up, at the worst you'd carry it for 5 days. You'd have to do it. You had to make your water last.
How much water did you use a day?
Well, we had 4 water bottles. You could carry a maximum because weight was a very important thing. Carrying, the guys were carrying in support gummy, they'd be carrying Lincoln mortar rounds and the works. You'd be carrying the radio sets. You had all these sort of things as well as your normal full gear. The 4 bottles or 2 bottles if it was going to be a shorter couple of days or something, that would have to last you. And the irony was we had to shave as well every day in the morning. Our routine sort of started at first light or before first light. You'd have to stand to. Everyone in the company or the battalion, if you were out, would have to be dead silent, no heating of meals or anything, and you would just be prepared for an enemy attack. That particular time was most likely time of an attack as dawn sort to come through. So you'd stand to for an hour there and then stand down, have a quick breakfast of some sort and on the track. And every night when we pulled up, you had to, again, dig a foxhole and stand to for that hour of last light. We used to always, if we were moving with an American company or battalion close to us, we would always make sure that we were away from them because I think we valued our life more than our comfort, whereas they would chop a hot meal in. We wouldn't. We'd just have this, very cold, bloody sort of meal. But then the Yanks would bloody radio in and say, well, how come we got boarded and you didn't? It's pretty basic common sense, but that's the way they operated.
At night with your guard rosters, how did that work when you're out in the bush?
Yeah, it was a roster system. You would usually do a minimum of 2 hours during the night. In my particular case, I'd been promoted to captain while I was in Vietnam, and in my particular case, I had to man the command post, and there was myself and the intelligence officer and sometimes the second in command. We had to man the command post all night between us. So you might do 2 shifts of 2 hours during the night. Yeah, you had to make sure that you knew who you were going to relieve and who was going to relieve you. So that when I knocked off, I had to work my way through the scrub and I had to know exactly where the guy was camped to get him to take over. And we would man it, and we'd have a radio operator with us in the command post as well. And the diggers would do the exact same sort of system, but on the fire pits all around the perimeter and everything. There was full alerts all the time.
Did they just sleep in their trench, or did they rig up bivvies above their trench?
If you were on the move, you would dig a foxhole, but you wouldn't have any sort of support on the perimeter. But you would have, inside the perimeter, you would have if the weather was going to be wet or anything, you'd have a ground sheet or a tarp little bed thing you carried, the hoochie, we used to call it. And if you could wake up a couple of sticks or something, just have it over you to cover you. Yeah.
Going back to base, you said that one company was always out on patrol. Did you go out on patrol at platoon level, or how did that work?
We always had at least a platoon out on the move around the area to, in case there was any sort of massing of troops or something to come into the battalion area. That would go on when we might be in for a few days. Most of the time we were out, and then the base camp would have to be manned by the support company, admin company, blokes to be rostered to do it. The key things were the ability to be able to get what we called dust-offs in. When we had wounded guys and everything, we had to very quickly sort of clear a little chopper pad enough to get a chopper in if necessary, or otherwise they would have to be winched out. That was an important thing. That was known as dust-off. We'd come up on the air immediately and let them know that we were in contact. It'd be, contact, wait out, boom. And then we'd give them the information of what we required, or the artillery or whatever that we required in, mortars. And you'd have your dust-offs.
Did your dust-off go to an Australian base, or could they go to the closest medical base?
No, the dust-offs, we had a wonderful field hospital developing after I came home. The field hospital was developed down at Van Tau. While I was there, they had a very small sort of hospital set up in Nui Dat, and they would be, if they weren't really serious, they'd be chopped to there for immediate, first aid and treatment. And quite often we had American dust-off as well as Australian in the area. So you would just get the first available dust-off you could get and get the guy there quick. And I think it was interesting, on a ratio in Vietnam, we had a far greater percentage of amputees than in World War II. But the prime reason for this, I think, is that in World War II, the guys would die if they had an arm blown off or a leg blown off or something. By the time they got to treatment, in many cases they would die. Whereas we had the dust-off and the choppers, we were able to get our guys to hospital very, very quickly. The medics in the battalion were very well trained to give them immediate first aid, morphine and so forth. Yeah, we had higher amputees, but we had guys alive, which was a great thing.
Did you have medics in each platoon?
Each platoon had a medic trained, yes.
And then the guys were all trained on first aid?
Yeah, you were basic first aid. You were very basic, immediate.
In terms of food, what was your food like?
Bloody horrible. It was all ration pack. Yeah. What they call 24-hour pack was the main one that you had. There was no hot box type things or anything. They gave you all you needed. You could operate for a long time on the ration packs. They were about I suppose, 8 to 10 inches by about 4 inches by about 2 inches, sort of in a pack. And that each pack would be designed to last you for the 3 meals for the day. And you used to barter and swap around for the wonderful sort of things that you liked in the pack and someone else didn't. You'd barter around and go with that.
And then coming back, what was that experience like?
It's an interesting one. When we came back, most of the national servicemen had finished their 2-year tour, so they would disperse and be discharged, go home. Whereas myself, within a week of being home, I was adjutant of a regiment and back working. But I had a rather bitter sort of taste in my mouth because at that time, the real reaction to Australians in Vietnam was happening back home, and things happened that I found very hard to believe and accept. I'd sort of been brought up with this belief of God, King and country, and I had a great love and still have a great love of my country. I found it very hard when things like our letters, during the time I was there, the posties went on strike. So when you came in out of the bush, the first thing you wanted was a letter from home. I was a married man, 23 years old. I wanted to get a letter from home, and suddenly you didn't. They weren't there. And I couldn't understand how my country would allow this sort of thing. And then during that same time, we had the supply ship Parrot, which is a Svian man ship at the time, used to bring all our supplies in from Australia. You know, your rations, ammo, all this sort of stuff would come by them. And they, while I was there, they arrived at Vung Tau, where the boats used to go in, and refused to come in and unload. They just said, we're against the war. And boom. And again, mentally, this is sort of going, how can this happen in my country? This is just not on. So we had these sort of things going on. And not long after I came home, my brother-in-law, who wasn't a vet, was a social member at the RSL at Furniture Gully. And I got invited. He asked me to come on a bloody Sunday to the RSL. And I said, yeah, fine. We went there, and I hadn't even had my first beer. And I had a couple of blokes sidle up to me and asked, what right have I got to be there? And I said, well, I'm an army officer, I'm a vet, you know. No, you're not. And you're not welcome, you know. Now, I left with a few bumps and left a few bumps, but, you know, these things were very hard to swallow. So I guess that left a fair bit of thing. When I resigned my commission and got out, I didn't want to hear about Vietnam again. And I'd collected quite a lot of memorabilia in my time, especially with the Montagnards and things like this. And I reached a stage where I just said to my wife, I'm going to throw this out. I don't want anything to do with it. And she said, no, you're not going to throw it out. She said, if you don't want it, do something with it. And that's where the thought of initially a museum sort of came up. And so we developed a mobile trailer. A mate and myself built this mobile trailer, and we stocked it full of memorabilia. And I'd started to become involved in welfare with the vets and helping them. And a lot of the vets were out in the scrub, and they weren't relating well to civilians. And so we started to take it around Victoria, and vets started to come to look at it, but also so did civilians. And it started to do a little bit of a healing thing. And I guess it snowballed from there.
Coming back from Vietnam, with all that combat experience, you said you were in command of a battalion again. How did that impact how you approached training?
I came back to SIGs. My corps said, hey, you've been away too long. I'd been 3 years away from the corps, and they said, you're coming back. And I came back as adjutant of the regiment. And when I marched into the regiment, I was told I was going to be adjutant. Adjutant is responsible for all the discipline of the thing. We had nearly 1,000 men, counting our CMF attachment in this unit. And I said, hey, no, well, I'm a hands-on man. I'm not But I think it helped me an awful lot. They insisted that I take the role, and I was adjutant for 3 years of this battalion. I think it helped me to understand the vets a lot more. I was very conscious with my background of being a digger to start with. I was always accused of having what they called an OR attitude, an other ranks attitude. But basically, there was a means of tackling a problem rather than charge a man for an offence. I would rather go that way. And I think that was reinforced in Vietnam, and I used to use that system. In my whole army career, I only charged one man once for an offence. I always found another way to handle the problem. And I guess that's a lot of that came from my war experience and my absolute respect of the guys.
They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.